Hi, my name is Dr. Chuck Diviney. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and I have been invited by Brian and Kyle today to discuss protective orders in domestic violence cases and when they are useful, a lot of times when they are more antagonistic or manipulative, to discuss also the efficacy or do they work? Do protective orders actually work? So.
We were going to touch a little bit on DCFS, when they're involved, if they should be involved, what to do when they are involved, some things like that to try to help you navigate those either dangerous or pleasant waters, depending on whatever the case may be. As we talked a little bit off camera, we talked a little bit about some of our experiences with DCFS or some of the things that happen in protective orders. And as I was explaining to Dr. Diviney, some of the protective orders obviously are put into place when there's no actual violence, and then there are cases, real extreme cases, where there's absolute violence and people end up getting killed, and there's even a protective order in place. And so, as you were saying, sometimes those protective orders don't work, and by they don't work, I think he means, right, that somebody got actually harmed.
Right. And that's not even just someone got harmed. In my research that I conducted in 2005 on protective order cases, my partner Asha Parekh from the YWCA and myself pulled 170 cases from 2002 protective order violations. And when we did the data analysis on those cases, what we found was that in only 24% of the cases did the judge order, for instance, probation. In 5 of the 270 cases was there an order to remove weapons. These are cases where there were assaults, there was actual violence, and
with evidence,
yes. and we had
just allegations,
not just allegations, right. And I think what's happening now, that research that we found just was consistent with around the country, and prior research that had been done here in Salt Lake about how protective orders are just a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. Number one, they do not protect people's lives, and actually the risk for death or serious injury goes up significantly after someone gets a protective order, right. Because it incites the ego,
right.
Basically. And so
I think a lot of the things that happen in divorce, whether it's intended or not,
sure.
You'll never know. But for example, child support. When child support is basically put in such a way that it almost causes that contention. You have to fight over it because you're not just fighting over custody of your own child to see the child and have that equal time. You're also pitted against each other because it's like, hey, that's a huge part of my income that I've got to pay, or that's a huge part of my income that I've got to survive on when you're mom, or if mom makes the money and dad doesn't. I think that creates contention and creates, you're already irritated and you're divorcing, sure. And there's issues. And so those are some of the things, along with like the protective order, like you say, it just makes things worse, even though you're hoping that it's going to kind of calm everybody down and have everybody realize, like, people are watching, I could get in trouble here. Yes. Sometimes it has the opposite effect.
Sure.
And, I think that's definitely something that it'd be a good thing, obviously, if in a perfect world everybody got along and realized, look, just because we're divorcing, we don't have to divorce our kids. Right. And just because we're divorcing, we don't have to ruin one person's life versus the other, if everybody could get along. But
sure. Dr. Diviney, as a member of the general public, up until now operating under the presumption that these were effective and or at least well-intentioned, this is all news to me, and I'm very curious about specifically you're mentioning that there could be more contention and perhaps even more threat of violent ramifications under the protective order. Could you speak more on that? I'm really curious about it.
Yeah, well, so usually when I'm looking at domestic violence, there's 2 types of domestic violence. We have power and control violence, which in 90% of the cases, it's predominantly male. That is, it's a male perpetrator. In situational violence, domestic violence, actually it's about the same with a slight edge on females. More females are perpetrator in situational violence. These are people that lack conflict resolution skills, okay? So they get going. Most of the time when I'm talking about the protective order case and the inciting the ego, I'm talking about the power and control violence.
I would assume so.
Right, and so when they go to get that protective order, that is a bash to an already false, inflated sense of self.
Right.
Okay, so if they're going in there, now it's public, because they like to put on an image. They like to look good, right? Now everyone knows that they're violent, or there's been episodes, or their relationship is going down. And everyone is seen basically as an extension of who they are. That's going to incite this defense, if you will, and that's going to be the violence. That's going to be acting out.
And so for the people that are falsely accused, it could also just up the emotional ante, because you're irritated that, look, I've lived a good life, I've been a good guy, I'm not violent. If anything, I'm the opposite of that, and now I'm being accused of that. So there is that insult to injury for the people that are falsely accused, and so I can see how that definitely would make things just more.
They're going to be different. Maybe initially it looks the same because of the outburst or the emotional investment, if you will, or output. But over time, you can see there are two very different individuals. Someone who's been falsely accused. Of course, that's going to be inciting. They're going to be upset about that. That hurts because we're dealing with someone who, we're in love, and now things are gone south. We're getting a divorce, and there's a protective order, and now they're accusing me of being, doing these heinous things or violent things. That's a lot to swallow. So that's going to create some dysfunction. It's going to be a bad day. The other individual, it's going to show up differently. It's going to, because this is someone who it may even appear like it's not affecting them, because they're going to want to continue this air of I've got it, I can handle this, I'm strong. But behind the scenes, it's going to start falling apart. There's going to be a lot of more accusations from that perpetrator too, the true perpetrator. They're going to be like, I didn't do that, this is what they do. Whereas the other person is going to be focused on trying to defend themselves. So.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a very important distinction to make. So since you're positing, and you could back it up, that in the instances where there has been violence occurring, or there is a predilection for that, the person is oftentimes incited by the protective order, and that can cause issues.
Right. But incited by the protective order because it also signifies this is the end.
Right.
So and this is even more so the end. So now I'm going to be alone.
Yeah, and then you've got nothing to lose, I guess.
Basically, that is one of the attitudes that comes up.
So obviously, for the person in that case who was legitimately requesting the order, none of that's really a concern. They just want to, feel safe. And so I'm obviously pointing out a problem doesn't necessitate that you have a solution, but I'm curious if you have an idea of what would be effective in those cases.
Instead of getting a protective order?
Yes.
When I work with a client, I always explain to them that the protective order is a piece of paper. So it's not going to protect them. It's not going to be a wall. It's not a barrier. It's not a magic spell.
Of course.
Basically, it is a piece of paper. The positive about getting a protective order for someone in a very seriously violent situation is that now I can begin to get a track record. Right. Now I've got some evidence here. Now I'm collecting these protective order violations. But the negative to this thing is that, you get the protective order, it's going to really make the perpetrator upset. And dysfunctional as it may be, the person's upset, and they're now looking at this like they're out to get me. Everyone's out to get me.
Right.
I'm losing this person, this person that has surrounded and buffered my ego.
Losing my kids.
I'm losing my kids.
Right.
I'm losing my life.
Understood.
And this is a significant blow to the ego. And their reaction has always been violence. So I don't think it's far-fetched for us to think that, because now everything's going, this level of losing everything and violence to protect that is going to skyrocket. And we know, I've seen figures as high as 75% of the cases. Not that I can prove it, but 75% increase in chance of death or serious injury happens when a protective order is taken out. Happens when the person separates from the perpetrator. So
is it fair to say that that's sort of like the equivalent of the rug being pulled out from under you? That's why people that are already I don't want to necessarily call somebody a freak, but like a control freak. People really want control.
Yes, this is about control, power and control.
And if you're a person that likes to have control over your life because you like to know what to expect, the protective order really pulls the rug right out from under you. You're like, am I losing my kids? Am I losing this person forever?
It separates
right.
them further from what the person they were trying to control,
Right.
and now leaves them exposed to this lack of self-control.
Right.
And so, and that's the best way I can state it. But once that happens, that individual is at severe risk. So whenever I'm working with someone who is in a domestic violence situation, we do what's safety planning. We plan for people to stay. We plan for people to go. I try and do both plans because I realize that this isn't just about power and control. This is about love too.
Right.
And there was an element of love in this relationship at one point. And still very may well be.
Sure.
So I have a safety plan put into place. I make sure that people understand to have, documents, that people understand to have a couple of friends that are aware of what's going on, a safety word, a place to run to, have a bag ready to rock. Sometimes I even have people keep that bag at a friend's house or at a family member's house so that if they do have to leave, that bag's already out of there. You don't have to grab the bag, go back into the house and grab the bag. A lot of times I make sure to if it's mothers with children, and I say mothers because 90% of the cases perpetrators are male, and I say make sure and have a stuffed animal, a blanket ready already over at wherever that leave bag is, to be prepared in advance, because when something goes down, it's quick, it's very quick. And the chance of harm, serious harm in those crisis incidents, it just escalates.
Right.
And it's so quick when someone loses a life or becomes seriously injured.
Right, and even though there may be a lot of red flags leading up to it, you don't know when something's going to get so bad that you're like, I don't feel safe. I gotta
Walking
get out
on
of here.
eggshells.
Right.
That's the tension building
Right.
part of that domestic violence cycle. And it's coming. In fact, I've known some victims where they will actually antagonize the perpetrator, if you will, poke to get that tension building phase over.
Right.
And in a lot of those cases, we see where victims of domestic violence are actually cited or arrested for domestic violence. That's another control tactic of the perpetrator, to get the victim arrested and incarcerated and, now see what you've done, this is all your fault. So, these are extreme
See, and
cases.
Right, that can't be the majority.
No, these are the extreme cases of domestic violence.
That certainly does happen though. Like
Oh,
if you
yeah.
get somebody
Oh, yeah.
and the control is on the other end where they want to control you with the protective order. They want to control you with, I'm proving you're a bad person even though I know I've got my own problems.
Yeah.
It can be used both ways, and that's why it's it was intended to be a shield. The domestic violence things like VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. Those things were intended to protect people. But
Yeah.
people that really are manipulative and that may be very mentally sick will use that as a weapon.
Right.
And just try to ruin your life. And
So one of the things that because I work with both female and male perpetrators and have worked with both female and male victims in on both sides of the fence here. And what I would say is when there's a protective order put in place, typically, from a bystander here, I'm looking at it going, okay, the protective order didn't just come out of the blue. Something is going on. There's some kind of issues here, some kind of crisis.
Just a lot of arguments,
Even if there's just a lot of arguing, and I think the courts have done a much better job. I can't say that I have scientific proof on that, but I think that they have done a better job at deciphering, do you have proof for some kind of violent threat against person and property? And that's part of the requirement of a protective order. And so unless there's this proof, then we're not going to give you this protective order. Sorry about that. But if there's a protective order in place, that means that somewhere along the line there was some imminent threat, some danger.
I've seen and talked to a lot of people, and that's the hard thing. It's so hard for you to
so
tell
tough.
what's really happening unless you have some backgrounds to
Right.
be able to tell different people's personalities.
Right.
But I sat in court once and I watched a mentally handicapped girl get a domestic violence charge, which she took a plea on. She didn't even fight it. She lived in like a special needs home, and her alleged boyfriend had taken her hat. I went and asked him about it after because I was like, "What just happened?" And they were horsing around, her and her alleged boyfriend. It wasn't even because they lived under the same roof, they qualified for domestic violence. Because of
cohabitant.
Right.
It's cohabitant.
And I think he took her hat, was teasing her or something, and she like poked him in the eye. And somebody called it in and thought that, whether it was accidental or not, a domestic violence charge over that, I was blown away.
So the person with disability was charged with domestic violence.
For accidentally poking her boyfriend in the eye because he stole her hat.
So that's,
you're
and
like,
I see cases like this. They're not common,
Sure.
and I'm very careful when I talk about these because then I have the other extreme of these cases. Oh, that's me. That's what really happened. It was an accident.
well, and I
Right.
talked
When it
to another
wasn't an
couple
accident,
that
so.
they got charged with domestic violence because they were arguing over money, which is a typical.
Sure.
That's a source for irritation for a lot of people.
I would say that's number 2
Yeah, it's
on
up
the
there.
list of arguments.
It's up there, and
Communication is number
right. And I think he threw like a 20 and a 10 or something to her, like, well, fine, here's $50. And they cited him for throwing the money, the paper money, domestic violence, because he threw something. And you're like, okay. Another time, somebody threw like a pair of gloves, and they got.
I could see the gloves more than the money. I mean, they both meet the criteria for the law.
Because you threw something.
So they threw something. So here's what I tell
So if
people.
you threw a feather.
Yeah, I mean, if you throw a feather, but it's not necessarily about the object
It's about
itself.
the anger.
It's about the intention
The imminent
aimed.
threat
Right.
of domestic
I wouldn't even
violence.
say imminent threat. I would
Oh.
say this is about the intention, the directive of my anger.
Sure.
The directive of what I'm trying to do.
I don't think a lot
I'm
of people know
throwing
that. This is
stuff
interesting.
because I'm trying to get you to do something.
Right.
Do this.
Well, I know about the whole. I broke this, and so psychologically, I'm showing you that
I could do this to
Yeah.
you.
I could do this to you.
I'm not familiar with the criteria.
So when we look at some of these laws, like destruction of property, that's a good one that you brought up because a lot of people are like, it was my phone,
I
Chuck.
slammed the door.
It was my door. It
Yeah.
was my house.
picture
And I'm
fell
like,
off the wall.
okay, so if I came into my office and we're running group and I'm ready through balances and you have a balance and I pick up a chair and bust it on the floor in front of you
You're gonna go,
because you didn't pay your balance,
Right.
what message is that sending?
Right.
And they always say,
Right.
you better pay your bill
Right.
or else.
Right.
And that's what I think that's what we're trying to relay with these laws. People who supported these laws and designed these laws were designing them with the intention of
It's not like-
understanding this
Yeah,
information.
it's not like you were already chopping wood.
Sure.
And he was chopping the block.
Right.
Well, he was already chopping the wood.
Right,
Wasn't-
right.
Yeah.
That
Again,
would
that
be
seems,
Yeah.
yeah.
if you're already chopping wood and then
Right.
you're like, get me lunch or something, I don't know that
Right.
I don't like that
Circumstantial.
scenario,
Sure.
I don't
Yeah.
want my partner screaming, get me lunch,
While
or
they're
something
chopping
like
wood.
that. While they're
Right.
chopping wood, that's a little shining level. But anyways.
Not realistic, but I was just trying to make.
Sure.
A point.
What I would say though, a lot of people come in, or sending a text when there's a protective order in place.
Sure.
Well, the judge told you leave them alone.
Right.
Totally, 100%.
Said no contact whatsoever.
Zero.
Right.
Leave them alone.
Right.
So
No
when
contact.
someone comes into my office and I have to do an assessment, I feel bad for this person because I'm like, you have to do 16 classes like everyone
Right.
else because you violated the protective order.
And they're like, but I just said.
But I just
Happy
sent a
Mother's
text,
Day. I've heard it, yeah.
or how you doing,
Yeah,
and
it's
I'm
your
like,
birthday.
and that's a violation. The
Right.
judge didn't say don't send naughty, nasty texts, send positive,
Well, and
friendly
that's
text.
one
The
thing
judge
that-
said
yeah.
zero contact.
And that's one thing that most people don't understand in
Right.
protective orders. Even third party.
Oh,
You're
third-party
talking-
contact,
You're talking
big
to
no-no.
like your ex's mom.
Or a
and you're like,
friend,
Tell her I
or
said happy birthday. Well,
or
the
you
mom says.
cancel the power bill, or
Yeah.
something like that. That's a third-party contact.
Right, and the mom can
Yeah.
say, he said to say happy birthday. Well,
No,
that was a
that's a
message you
third party.
passed through
Yeah,
a third
of course.
party, and that's a violation.
And
Absolutely.
and to break that down to understand why,
Yeah.
I mean, when we have a serious perpetrator, for instance, okay, they're going to try and call mom maybe and say, mom, I love her. Please just talk to her
Yes,
for me.
Right.
And see, the victim knows what that means.
Yeah.
Like, he's coming back. And
Mhm.
if there's been violence, and most of the time you have to realize the violence occurs behind closed doors. So we don't know. We don't even know what happens.
Right.
I mean, it's not common for us to go out and just relay all information about what happens in our home. And that's even more so with domestic violence because of the embarrassment, the shame, the
course.
fear. What I tell people is if there's a protective order, don't make contact. And I want to talk about something else that I do know happens. I've heard it many times throughout my career. Is that she got this protective order, then she called me to come over. So I thought it was okay.
Yeah, no.
And I'm like, man,
No,
no.
and that happens a lot.
It happens
People
a
will-
lot.
And that's usually the person that's actually the one that has the control issue. They're trying to bait you. And
I would
they
say
get
that both
told-
have control.
Yeah,
Usually
sure.
when I see those, I'm thinking more situational violence, like tug
Yeah.
of war.
Right.
But in a case like that, if there's a protective order, this is how I put it. The judge said no.
Right.
And that's that.
Right.
Until the judge says yes,
Well, a lot of people don't understand that a protective order is usually ex parte. So if let's say you're at a grocery
for
store.
3 weeks it is, 21
Yeah.
days, yeah.
Yeah. And so let's say you're at a grocery store and you were the first but then your ex happens to also be there.
You have to leave.
Guess who has to get out of there?
You have to leave.
Right. It's not, well, there's a protective order. She shouldn't be around me either. No, they're going
No.
to say,
No.
That's a big
In the
misconception.
serious instances,
Yeah.
you know, that's maybe necessary evil,
Yeah.
but
Right.
as you
Sure.
point out, that's not every case.
Right.
This is, so yeah, as I think me and a lot of people who have, you know, only a passing understanding of protective orders,
Sure,
what they do,
sure.
which I think is the perspective I'm bringing to this. Obviously, a primary concern is, you know, protecting victims of domestic violence. But I think very compelling is the evidence you bring that it may not even be effective at doing that.
It
So-
is in some cases, and
Right.
we know in the more serious
Yeah.
death cases, the homicide
Of course,
cases,
yeah.
that there may not have been a protective order.
Right.
And if we had, I cannot definitively say that if we
Exactly.
had one, they'd still be alive, because
Yeah.
that may have
Well,
just
of
driven
course.
them quicker and more hostile.
Yes.
So,
But you feel, it seems like, and I don't want to misinterpret, that there's not enough compelling evidence that it does what it's supposed to do, that if we were to adopt something else, it would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like, there's not enough people that are actually being protected, would be your stance? Or is that difficult to say?
it's difficult to say. I would
Yeah.
say that, I mean, there's a partial benefit to protective orders.
Right, oh, of course.
And like I
Yeah.
said, this is a partial benefit of being able to record down these instances of violations. We can now look at
Well, if nothing else, it
intensity.
establishes some boundaries.
Sure,
Like, I am willing
sure.
to
Yeah.
get help.
I
can't
would
keep
say
that.
that in most cases, people are like, I have a protective order, I'm keeping my boundary. And I think that's what it serves, is to say, stay away. In the cases where we're talking about safety, you know, a person's safety should not be reliant upon the protective order, ever,
Right.
ever. I think it helps in the legal cases, but I think in some cases, it actually does more damage. My statement would be, if you are in one of these people, and you're considering getting a protective order, considering leaving, get a professional involved. Get someone who has domestic violence specialization. Just because they're a counselor, just because they're a doctor, just because they're a nurse, does not mean that they know what they're talking about. If they have not had specialized domestic violence training,
Yeah.
they don't know what they're talking about. So I would say get someone who's got that certification, that specialization. They
Right.
have victim advocates you can go talk to. They have shelter workers. They have
That's valuable information.
the link line. It's the 1-800-DB link line. Here, domestic violence link line here in Utah. 24 hours, 24/7. They're available, I believe. I think they may have had funding cuts, so I think their hours are different. I haven't used it for a while, but you can look it up online. It's 897 link. And you can call and say, this is my situation, this is what's happening. You can call Utah Domestic Violence Council. They are the state council, and underneath them are a number of state coalitions, usually by county, that serve domestic violence shelters, domestic violence treatment programs, domestic violence victims, and in a lot of cases, domestic violence perpetrators. That's one of the things I've always been focused on, is making sure we have services for perpetrators and victims,
Sure.
because
That's
both are in need.
Yeah.
Both are in need.
And the reason I ask these things is because right now it seems like this is the biggest weapon that, or tool in the arsenal.
I'm glad you said
Yeah,
weapon.
yeah. Well, like,
I'm glad you said weapon, man.
we're-
Because people do use it as a weapon.
Fair enough. But so, given that this may seem like your only recourse to someone, do you think that the instances where it is not preventative are an issue of uneven enforcement, or do you think that the idea itself is not good in theory?
Meaning where violence is not preventive.
Like,
The
If someone
protective
has-
order isn't going to prevent violence.
right, is that
Are there other
because-
ways?
Is that, well, yes, do we need a better way from the ground up, or is it that the protective order is not, because it's just a piece of paper, is like not being enforced as well?
No, I think in some cases it's being enforced.
Okay.
I think, and my data said that. My data said, you've got these 25% of cases where probation is being ordered.
Right.
It was like 50%. Or 25% was treatment and 50% was probation. So you've got these numbers. They're not where I want to see them. If a protective order is violated, then this is what I want to see.
Right.
We follow the law. That's really what the purpose of the study was. But there's going to be the protective orders are designed by humans, so it's going to be fallible. It's going to have that fallible component to them.
Of course.
Are there other things that we can do? Yes, definitely. And I think a protective order is only one part of a very diverse, multidimensional system to leaving a relationship, getting help.
Right.
And when people, I think we have to realize when people in divorce cases get it to solidify their divorce or stabilize their case
Sure.
or make their side stronger, they're actually weakening the strength of these protective
Yeah,
orders.
I think everyone agrees with
I think, and I don't think people
That's sad because the
It's
people that
sad.
truly need it
are now not.
have to
Yeah.
fight harder to get that
Sure.
protection when
Sure.
they deserve it. But-
Yeah, and when we've got law enforcement responding to I think he's going to violate the protective order, or something like, they're like, really, and it's a waste.
Or the flip side, that the police are like, look, there's a protective order. I've seen cases where there's a protective order and it was totally baseless, and the police were like, well, we can't talk to this person. You're trying to say, well, there's custodial interference going on, and that is a law that's being violated. It's on the books. The cops will say, well, there's a protective order,
Right.
and then you get that kind of hesitation from the police because they don't want to violate a protective order.
Well, and I think we have to look at why that is, because
Right.
there's this history of misuse of
Sure.
the protective orders,
Sure. And then-
or where people are
Sure.
using the courts as a custody battleground.
Sure.
And what I think the bottom line in these kind of cases, the custody cases with protective orders, the impacts on the kids. I can't tell you how many children I've spoken with that are like, I'm mad at both my parents.
Yeah.
I've had adolescents say, I hate both my parents, which is so, that just hurts the heart to hear. And they're upset because they have become this I don't know, tool in this battle
Yeah.
between the
Or
parents.
scrap of meat that they're fighting over.
Yeah, like
hey,
a tug of war over
yeah.
this kid. And
Sure.
and I think oftentimes parents become consumed by their fight than consumed by the care that they're required to provide to their
Yeah.
kids.
Eric and I made a video where we literally have like a police cap on, and I'm the officer that's being real reluctant to help with the custodial, not because cops are bad and they don't want to help, but sometimes they really can't. But we kind of did a back and forth of what to expect and kind of how to deal with the officer if you're reporting the custodial interference in a professional way, and to just be like, can you contact them? Those things are difficult to deal with because obviously, the police, they don't want to get pulled into a cat fight either, but who's going to be the person to enforce the decree? Who are going to be the people that are going to actually say, well, hey, this is your time? Those things, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, and I think in a protective order, there's often, like in an ex parte order, there are provisions to, usually in the ex parte order, and what ex parte is, one party goes and files a protective order. Only one party needs to be there to get this ex parte order, which only lasts 3 weeks. Then 21 days later, we have a court hearing on having a protective order.
And then they go permanent, they'll call it temporary, but it's 2 years at least minimum.
Right, 2 years minimum.
And then you can
And then
fight
you can
to change it.
fight and
or
change it at the
petition
end
to
of 2
change
years,
it,
right?
whatever
And
it
there
is.
are lifetime protective orders too. And the lifetime protective orders are the ones that I definitely would say take seriously. Those
Yeah.
are the ones where we have ample evidence that has been presented in court that says this person has continued to be a threat for 2 years, or has been such a significant or serious threat in the beginning of this that the trauma is lifelong.
Sure.
So, but in the 2 years, I think 2 years is a good enough time to have a protective order. I think a lot of times some of these get excused
Sure.
inappropriately, if you will. There's always going to be holes in this.
A
and I think
2 year, you go to your room and you stay.
well, let's say at the end of the 2 years, the victim has moved and there's no way to notify them, and
Right.
the perpetrator goes in to get it removed, and they win by default.
Right.
Well, that could be a really serious situation if we had a serious case. So, there are holes in this thing,
Sure.
and I think that's why we all need to be working together and help educating people.
I know a commissioner that actually, the protective order was put before him, and this is, again, I was just in court, and the commissioner, there were some serious allegations, like I was beat and thrown out in the street in my underwear, and then they never even showed up. And so the commissioner was talking about it, kind of like, I can't do anything if you don't at least come to court. He felt like it was probably needed and that it was probably serious, but they didn't show up. And so, in divorce and in the legal process, there's people that have all kinds of different concerns. And the one thing, as you've stated, and I like talking to these counselors and mental health professionals, because they aren't looking at it from a you're in trouble, go to jail sort of standpoint. They're looking at it. How do we fix this? How do we
Right.
make sure?
How do I
and
keep
maybe
someone
fix isn't the
safe?
right word.
Well, my thing
Give
is,
people the tools.
sure, when I work with a perpetrator and they're like, well, how are you keeping me safe? And I'm like, well, you don't want to meet Bubba at jail, you know,
Right.
in prison.
I'm keeping you out of
if you
jail.
work with
Yeah.
me, that's going to keep you safe.
Right.
And the thing is that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect,
Sure.
regardless of what they're coming to see
Sure.
me for, victim, perpetrator, whatever it is.
Yeah.
My philosophy is that we all have our crap, and at sometimes it just gets deeper and deeper
Yeah.
for us, and that's where we call on our help,
Yeah.
our community to help us. And so education is part of this as well. And I hope that people in a divorce situation, if they are feeling burdensome by the fight and the ongoing money and the ongoing hearings and that, and they think that maybe a protective order is a way to maneuver this case, go see someone, go talk to someone, because the protective order could cause a lot more problems for you, the person filing it, if it's filed erroneously or maliciously, if you will.
Well, one thing that I think we should touch on before we wrap up, so that we're not going too long.
Yeah.
We don't want to bore our audience by talking forever. I don't know how many of them like the conversations that we have, but I mean, I will watch a video to a certain point, even if I like it.
Sure,
And
sure.
distractions will pull me away, kids or whatever. But it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I think that some of the things that we've touched on, obviously, hopefully they'll help some people. But one of the things I like to always bring up when I'm talking to a mental health professional is, when you're going through a divorce, don't take talking to a counselor as some sort of attack to your pride, that you're messed up. Don't ever look at it that way, because when you're talking to a friend or your family, that's counseling. They just aren't a professional. You're still getting counseling when you go to your friend and say, hey, I'm stressed out about this.
Yeah.
What would you do?
Yeah.
That's still counseling.
Right.
So don't see counseling as a bad thing. Obviously you could get to the point where you're getting counseling for everything. Should I take the garbage out today?
There's an abuse of counseling
Don't
too.
go
I would
that
say.
far,
There's an
sure.
extreme of counseling. But I want to say something about friends and family. I
Yeah.
mean, I have my friends and family. I know which ones to pick to
Right.
tell me what I want to
You're
hear.
going to ask
I'm going to ask this
so-and-so
person to tell me this,
how
and
to
this
fix my
person.
plumbing.
Sure. Well, should I do this in a relationship? I know what I'm going to get from my friend,
Sure.
And then ask this person if I really need genuine feedback, because they call me on my crap all the time.
Yeah,
But in counseling, you come in my office, I'm going to call you on your crap, and
Yeah.
there's no string attached. Like,
Well,
I'm
you're
not here for you
you're
to
not
like
gonna go to
me.
your friend that's on his sixth marriage for a relationship.
Well, and there's no strings attached here.
Sure.
I'm not here to be liked.
Yeah.
And I've got enough clientele and booked on my schedule. It's not about the money. This is about, you're going to come sit in my office.
Sure.
This is how I do business.
Sure.
And so I tell people, I'm like, go see a counselor. I've been in counseling before. I recommend, if you go to a counselor, that you get a counselor who has been there before, that knows how it feels, that knows the process, And I think all of us,
You've got first-hand experience.
yeah, my personal philosophy is we're all a little bit crazy, and at times that crazy gets a little out of control. And I think it's a good thing for us to go and get some help, professional help. And it's, counseling isn't what it used to be. In the 1980s, it was schizophrenia, and then it was very
Only really
serious
serious
psychosis,
people.
right?
That's where that
now
stigma may come
counseling
from,
is
yeah.
like, it's like going to your massage therapist or your
Right.
personal trainer. You go and talk to someone. Because we do live in a society that's stressful. We live in a society that has a lot of issues, a lot of stressors, a lot of challenges. And I even tell people, going to a therapist to get, even when you're feeling good sometimes, just to check in. Maybe you're got some questions about yourself. You're doing some self-work, exploration. It's good for everyone. If you're going through a divorce, obviously something is not working. Something is not going well in your life.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for all of your
yes, thanks, Brian.
perspectives.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Brian.
Kyle,
Yeah.
for bringing that.
Thank you,
up.
Kyle. Thank you.
And we'll be talking to Chuck again soon.
More stuff,
Hopefully.
and maybe we'll have some background dancing monkeys or something.
Yeah,
Probably.
dancing
For
monkeys would be
distraction.
fun. Sure. For Halloween, maybe.
I don't know.
Awesome.
All right.